everybody, how are you doing? And welcome to maybe my favorite video to film every year. And that is the best books I have read in the past year. I have read 52 books in 2023. Granted, there were a few DNFs in there, but I've mentioned this before, sometimes I count my DNFs, sometimes I don't, depending how far I've gotten into them and how much effort I put into reading them or not, but it doesn't really matter. 52 books. So 52 books is roughly a book a week, which I'm super happy with. That's wonderful for me. And also, I didn't only have a good reading year quantity-wise, I also had a very good reading year quality-wise. I read a lot of fantastic books in 2023. A lot of them are new all-time favorites, which makes me super happy. I found a new favorite author. I've learned so much with the non-fiction that I've read, and I've DNF'd the books that I didn't like, and I just made a cut and I was like, no, I'm not gonna, I already have too much shit in my life. I am not gonna read stuff that I don't enjoy, and that really paid off. I just really had a good reading year. If you want to see all 52 books that I've read, the ones that I loved, the ones that I hated, the ones I DNF'd, the ones that were kind of complicated, and just in general, all 52 books that I've read, feel free to join my Patreon. I'm going to make a tier ranking video like I did last year, exclusive for my Patreons. When you're watching this, it should already be up. So if you go to the link in my description box and you sign up to my Patreon, you can watch it there. But today here on this channel, we are focusing exclusively on the best of the best, the books that made me the happiest, the books that are my absolute favorites from 2023. I've chosen 10 favorites plus one. I'm a little bit cheating. You will see it when we get to it. So 10 favorites for 2023. I could have made the list a bit longer. I have a few more that I really loved and that really impacted me. But those are the top 10 of the list. We are starting out with a book that I've read in the very beginning of 2023. I think it was my second or third book that I picked up in the year, and that is Absolver for the Wild Bill by Becky Chambers. This is a very short book set in a futuristic world where a tea monk just is having a rough time, and he's going to the woods where he meets a robot. And robots and AI have become sentient in this world and have abandoned humanity and went into the forest. I love this. I love this so much. I was a bit skeptical going into it because robots aren't really my thing, but this is such a calm, futuristic sci-fi, a positive sci-fi, and I just love Becky Chambers so much. I actually think at this point Becky Chambers is my favorite author of all time because I've never read anything by her that I didn't absolutely love. And I had The Galaxy and the Ground Within on my TBR for 2023, and I didn't read it on purpose because it is now the only book by her that I haven't read, and there's nothing new on the horizon, and I kind of want to savor it for a bad day. Anyway, this book, it discusses, a future that is more calm, community-focused, nature-focused, which I really loved, because when you think of sci-fi, you think of high-tech, right? And mega cities and, technological advances and all that kind of stuff. But that's not in this book. And it's very philosophical and just very calm. I feel like it would categorize as cozy sci-fi or something. I don't know. I also read the sequel, which is behind me here. But I didn't love the sequel as much as the first one. I feel like obviously they kind of belong together, and if they were one book, it would still make the favorites list. But I love this more than the second one. The second one was still amazing, but I love this one a lot more. So the next thing is where I'm going to cheat a little bit, and that is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. And then later in the year, I read The Oleander Sword, where I'm so obsessed with the cover. I can't even look at that. Look at the cover. I love the cover of The Oleander Sword. Oh my god, that's so hard to say. So much. And I'm gonna count them as one because I've read both of these books this year. I'm not so good at keeping up with series, honestly, usually, but these ones, I love them so much, and I'm eagerly waiting for the next installment to come out. I have no idea when it's coming out, but I'm ready. This book has been making its rounds for a while, but I never had the urge to pick it up until someone mentioned that there is a sentient forest in here, and I was like, Yes, please, I'm all in. Also, it's a sapphic fantasy, so a queer fantasy, and that's why I picked this up, and I fell in love with it. I love it so much, and then I picked up the Oleander Sword, loved it too. So I'm so eagerly waiting for the next installment, because this is one of my new all-time favorite fantasy series, and I love the characters, I love the world, I love the magic. I think it's such a refreshing thing in the fantasy world, because so much of fantasy is the same, and this is very much inspired by India and Indian myths and all this kind of stuff, and I just loved it. I want to reread them, honestly. Like, I love them so much. I feel like this year I really discovered that what I love a lot is nature magic, which is why the next book, This Poison Heart, also made it to my favorites list. This is a YA fantasy, and I usually don't really gravitate towards YA anymore, but this one really blew me out of the water. This is about a witch with nature magic, and specifically an affinity for poisonous plants. Especially for a YA book, this got really dark at times, and it also had like queer elements, and like you see, like, there's a theme here, like queer, nature, forests, dark. I'm all in. I'm all in. And this book also definitely fit the bill. I still need to read the sequel, and I'm very excited to do so. I hope it's gonna be good, but this one really just shone for me. Next up was the biggest book I've read in 2023, with almost 900 pages, and it's very tall as well, as you can see. And that is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This book I have discussed in length in a previous vlog when we were still doing renovations. I was reading this. You can actually also tell, like, there's like dust all over because it was during renovations that I read this. And I love this book, but I do absolutely see its flaws. This is the prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree, which I've read the year before and absolutely adored, absolutely loved. I also love The Priory of the Orange Tree much more than this one, than the prequel, for the reason that I read this second. I feel like if you want to go into this series, you don't have to read them in this order. Like, you can read them in whatever order you want, but this one I would recommend first, because if you've read The Priory of the Orange Tree, you're basically spoiled for some of the plot twists in this book, and then the main conflict of this book is spoiled to you by a prophecy very early in the book. So it's kind of like there was no tension. And that was like my main issue with it. I still gave it 5 stars. I think nowadays it would be 4, but it would still make it onto my favorites list, because I love this world so much, and I love the characters and the dragons in this book, and just the lore, the myth, everything. It's one of my, if not my favorite fantasy series ever, even though I see its flaws totally. I think I also really love that it's so thick, because like, you really disappear into this world and you get to know the world and its characters and, for example, the dragons really, really well, and you just disappear into it. And I loved it. I loved it, even though, again, Priory of the Orange Tree was better, and I was missing some tension, something to keep me hooked, which is important for a book this big. But I still fucking love it. Next up, we have a very hefty non-fiction, and that is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, which is a book that has the subtitle Mind, Brain and Body in the Transformation of Trauma. And this is very dense. It took me an entire month to read this. I could not read more than 1 chapter at a time because it was really heavy. It was a bit triggering at times, and it's kind of like a textbook. It's like very small font as well. And let me see if I find, and you can see here, it really, really talks about the science of trauma. This is not a self-help book. This is the cold, hard science of what trauma is and how it manifests, not only psychologically, but also in our brains and in our bodies and our physical reality. And I found that so fascinating. And this book, again, it was really hard for me to read, but it was something that definitely changed my life for the better, because I learned just so much about myself, about other people in my life, about the world in general. And I just, yeah, I was blown away by it. However, this book was written in 2014, which is now 10 years ago. So obviously science, psychology, all of that has advanced a lot. And I would love to see a more up-to-date version of this. I would also love to see this science being adapted by people of color, queer people, because this is written by a white man from Europe. So like the most privileged person you can find, basically. So I would love to have this applied to things like racism, sexism, queerphobia, all of that kind of stuff, and just connected with these things. So if you have a recommendation for that, please let me know down in the comments below, because I would love to know. Because this, I think, is a very great starting point, but it should not be like the end of the journey. And again, it's not a feel-good book. This is not like, oh, I think I have trauma, I need to feel better, I need to find a way of healing. This is not it. That's not the book to go for. But for me, because I am someone, I really love hard science, and it really helped me understand many things about myself and the world. And just, yes, I loved it. I highly recommend it if you are similar to me and you can handle it. But it is not an easy read. Next up is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I don't think I need to say anything about this book because everybody and their dog has already read this. A few years ago, this was probably the most hyped book on the internet, and this is why everybody has read it. And it's basically the story of a fictional Hollywood starlet who is getting old and who has asked someone, a young girl, to write her biography. I'm not doing the best job at describing what this book is about, but I don't think I need to do the best job because, again, everybody has already read this or at least heard about it. And like, I've been to bookshops a lot whenever I had the chance to, and this book is on display everywhere. So just read the back, look it up if it's something for you. I certainly enjoyed it. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. I don't think I would have been like on the hype train as much. I do see that it has some flaws. I have heard the criticisms of the book and I understand where they're coming from and I respect them. But I just had a really, really good time with them. I think it is very well written for what it set out to do. And I just had a lot of fun with those characters and with that story. And I think it is very, very, very well done. And I had a very long discussion with a friend of mine who pointed out some more deeper discussions that you can have about some of the topics in the book. And that was a really good time. And I think that really elevated my reading experience, like talking with my friend about it. And I just really enjoyed this book. Next up is a German book that unfortunately doesn't have a translation, and it is called Gegen die Ohnmacht by Luise Neubauer and Dagmar Remzma. Luise Neubauer is the head of Fridays for Future in Germany, and she has written many books, and she's obviously like an activist. And Dagmar Remzma is her grandmother, who has also been an activist for different causes throughout her life. What this book is doing is it creates a dialogue between generations, which I think is very, very necessary in all the world, but especially in Germany. I think that's so important that we have more dialogue between generations, because that's something that's really been missing, and where a lot of like misunderstandings happen and all that kind of stuff. And it shows you the connections between things like war and oppression and the climate crisis. And it also shows you how activism really helps you to get out of this state of Ohnmacht in German, which is like kind of like helplessness, like the numbness that you feel when you're overwhelmed, right? Like, for example, when you faint in German, you say you're falling in Ohnmacht, like unconsciousness. But you can also say someone is experiencing Ohnmacht when they're just like helpless or completely overwhelmed or completely like frozen in their overwhelm, when there's just so much happening, or you know, like something so terrible is happening that you are completely unable to do things, to express things, all that kind of stuff. And that book, like the title, I feel like fits very, very well because it really gives you the feeling of, okay, when I do things, things will get better because like we need movement. Because that's the only way out of there, which actually fits this book very, very, very well. And it's just this idea of if you move, you cannot get stuck, you know, and you need movement to move forward and to create positive change. And I think that this book did it so well, and I really appreciated it for what it was. Next up is another fantasy favorite. I had such a good year with fantasy and I'm so happy about it. And that is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This book is about a bit of an older woman. She's not old, but I actually don't know how old she is, maybe in her 40s-ish. I'm not quite sure, but she's not like 20 is what I'm trying to say. She's like a middle-aged woman who basically has retired from her previous life as a pirate and adventurer, but then due to some circumstances she's forced to go back doing that, and there's a lot of discussions about like motherhood and about female empowerment and how you're still capable of things even when you age, or even when society doesn't expect it of you, or even when you have a child, even when you carry the title and the role of a mother and you are a loving mother, you can still be a badass adventurer. And I really, really, really enjoyed my time. There was one part that I didn't fully love because it got almost comedic in a way that I didn't find very funny. Like, I'm just saying bird people. That's all I'm gonna say. I didn't vibe with that section of the book, but the rest of the book I really, really loved and enjoyed, and definitely a new favorite, and I need to look into more works by the author. Next up is my last physical book. I actually have a lot of physical books for the fact that I mostly read digitally nowadays, even though at this point I do have quite a decent amount of books here, because every time I go to Germany I bring more books and I send more of my books over. And nowadays I do have quite a collection here. But this one is The Overstory by Richard Powers. So I picked this up in a bookstore in Braga in Portugal. I went to some bookshops in the mainland of Portugal during the time now in the fall that my partner had like a very big health issue, and we were there because of him for a longer period of time. And I was like, I need to treat myself. Like, this year has been rough, and right now everything still feels very rough. So I want to treat myself. I want to buy myself a book. I found this beautiful bookstore, and I just really wanted to support this beautiful indie bookstore that I found. And they barely had English books. However, they had this, and I really love the edition. It really caught my eye, and especially that it says Vintage Earth also caught my eye. And I had heard about the book before, but I never had any interest in picking it up. But then I read the description on the back, and I read the first like 2 pages or something, and I was so enthralled. I was like, oh my god, I need to have this book. This book is basically 2 books in one, because in the first part you're getting introduced to a bunch of different characters and their life stories and their family stories and their connection to certain trees, because what this book essentially is an homage and a love letter to trees and forests, but mostly just trees in general. And I love that, obviously. And then in the second half, it's about these characters finding their ways to each other and how their lives are interconnected, just like, you know, the network of nature is interconnected. And you also have a big chunk that is about like activism for the trees, you know, about like trying to save the forests, trying to save nature. While I didn't enjoy every single point of view, like there were some characters that I just didn't really care about that I think this book could have done without, because it's also very thick. I still overall love this book and its message and how much the love for trees and nature just shone through, and it is beautifully written. The writing style is amazing, and yes, I love this, and I will carry this book in my heart for a very, very, very long time. Then, while I was in Germany and I was sick and I was going through a lot of doctor's appointments, I read Unwell Women, and this is a non-fiction book about how myth and sexism over the centuries have influenced medicine today, and why women are so often misdiagnosed or end up undiagnosed or dismissed, or why women in a lot of cases when a woman goes to the doctor, it's like, oh yeah, it's psychological, and it's like, we don't need to treat that. Or you just need to go to therapy, and nobody actually checks if there's anything wrong with their bodies and that kind of stuff. Obviously not every doctor is like this, but it is a very common experience for a lot of women that a lot of women share, even in my own life, like me, myself, and I, people in my family, people that I know, my friends, like I know almost no woman who didn't have a bad experience with some doctor at some point. And this book is a very big nonfiction book, and it really dives deep into the topic of why that is the case and how we ended up where we are today, also with gynecological studies and all that kind of stuff, how women were not supposed to be included in medical studies up until the 90s. And how, you know, like it talks about like hysteria and all of these kinds of things, and like how women were treated in medicine over time, or at least in Western medicine. That's important. It has a disclaimer in the front that it's about Western medicine, but I am a white woman in the West, so it fits very well for me, and it blew my mind. It is so enraging and so depressing to read, and disturbing at times as well, but it's so enlightening. It really blew my mind. And obviously I'm also aware that in the past, like medicine also for men was also sometimes very weird and very far from what we understand of medicine today. But still, the things that the women had to go through, and that some women still go through to this very day, is insane. It's absolutely insane. So if you ever want to get really, really angry, I recommend this book. And almost the last book that I read in 2023 is an audiobook that I listened to while I was baking my Christmas cookies, and that is Bittersweet by Susan Cain. This is a non-fiction about the feeling of bittersweet that you sometimes get. You know, like when you see a moment that is so beautiful that you tear up because you're already sad that the moment will eventually pass. That. Or like melancholic feelings, or like missing someone that we used to really, really love, either because they're no longer in our lives or because they've passed away, or that kind of stuff. So it talks about grief. It talks about like those beautiful moments and why we sometimes get sad about them, why we enjoy sad music. It also talks about how in the USA specifically, there is like this culture that you have to be happy at all times. Like you have to be like, yes, I'm fine, da da da, always smiling, always happy. And you know, I found all of that very, very interesting, and especially like the music part I really enjoyed, and there were some other bits and pieces like about grief and stuff. And I feel like this book is so needed in our society today, because we are so focused on either having absolute extreme drama and dramatization of things, especially when it comes to like world stuff that we see in the media, be it normal classical media or social media. There's like a lot of like fear that's being created, like very extreme emotions, or you have the extreme opposite of extreme positive stuff, like, oh, here are all my highlights of the year, look at me, I've just traveled to all these beautiful places, I've put like 10 filters on this photo so it's even more beautiful, I'm always smiling, I'm always happy, I'm always seeing the most positive stuff in life. And I've talked about this a little bit in the last video, that when you are not like that, or you just go through a very shitty time, you feel like you don't belong. And this book really makes you feel like you belong, and it also shows you how important it is that you do allow yourself to feel the negative things, and there's nothing bad about them, and that there's also beauty in sadness and in all of these kind of things. Those were the 10 books. I have one last honorable mention really quick, and that is Humankind, which is a book that is so flawed that it didn't really make it to my favorites of the year, but it is stuck in my mind. I read this also early in the year while I was painting the house, and it's just so stuck in my brain. And it's once again a book that really challenges our common perspective on life. because it gives you an alternative version of human history. Like, what if we focus on the positive things of humanity? And it doesn't like shy away from showing like, oh no, like we did do a lot of bad things as humanity, right? But it still shows you like, oh, most humans are actually good beings. Like, not everybody's evil, not everybody's bad. And I really enjoyed that. And again, like, it is a flawed book, which is why I wouldn't like put it in my top 10 favorites, but it does deserve an honorable mention because it is stuck in my brain nonstop. It lives there rent free. This is it, my favorite books of 2023. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day, and let me know down in the comments below what was your favorite book of the last year. Bye!